Hi guys, Togo here with a new video, and this video is a meta-analysis video that I've always wanted to make since a while, and I wanted to wait Xunamate to have like the meta sorted, especially since they did a lot of changes like every week, every 2 weeks, and right now it calmed a bit down because they are probably going to make a lot of changes for 10.0.7 and they're keeping those changes for that patch. So I think we'll have like a month patch where we will not see a lot of changes, unfortunately. So the main problems that are like, for example, assassination rogues in trees and slush of a bit, but also just like in general the shenanigans around a few specs here and there, they will not change until like a certain point. So I hope they do change a bit, but for now I don't have a lot of hope for that. Again, this channel is made for people that wants to go into PvP and want the most information possible while still in a beginner, intermediate, but also just a good level. So I'm going to help you guys to get motivated for PvP, have some tips, have some good gameplay for solo shuffle, have some, again, enjoyable things to watch. So hopefully if you like those kinds of content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. But now let's try to talk about trees, twos, and I will talk a bit about RBGs if the video is not too long. Again, we will try to make timestamps for trees and twos. I'm going to talk about EU and NA, and for solo shuffle, pretty much I'm going to give you my sentiment that probably didn't really change too much since the updated solo shuffle tier list I've made, but I'm going to still give my sentiment towards solo shuffle. Now let's start with threes. In EU, pretty much, I'm going to talk with melee, range, and healers. Clearly, melee-wise, in threes you have like a top 3 which is prevalent in EU, and then you have like a clear top 6 which are like probably the ones that you are going to face mostly in EU. So we have the top 3 being Assassination Rogue, Arms Warrior, and Havoc Demon Hunter. Assassination Rogue being mostly played with a caster, like let's say a Destruction Warlock or a Shadow Priest, or they can even play with a Duck Cleave, with a Beastmaster, or with even a Marksmanship Hunter. I saw a lot of marksmanship hunter these days. They do pump, but they are also easily targeted, so that's still a problem for assassination rogues. The most probable thing that you're going to see is assassination rogue is played in multiple comps, in multiple ways in approaching the game. You can still see assassination rogues being paired with elemental shamans. Still RMPs, again, I forgot about RMPs, but RMPs are mostly played with an Assassination Rogue right now. So Arcane Assassination Rogue or even Frost Mage Assassination Rogue, and sometimes a Fire Mage Assassination Rogue, although I see more Subtlety Rogues playing with Fire Mages than Assassination Rogues. At least that's my sentiment in threes. In two, like again, in threes also, Arms Warrior being super prevalent because it's now the choice, the spec choice for warrior in general. Warrior is always going to be a very popular spec, especially whenever it's a bit strong. I think arms is in a great spot. I don't think it's a S tier spec either, since they have clear weaknesses, but I think it's still a meta spec, so I would put it in A tier. And you see them mostly play with a caster. I think personally Elemental Shaman Arms Warrior and Shadow Priest Arms Warrior are the best comps for Arms Warriors right now, but you can also see them with a TSG. You will see Arms Warrior with the Retribution Paladin, but you also see a trend where people are not playing Retribution Paladin till 10.0.7 because they think there is no point in training Retribution Paladin because it will get changed that much. It's really a full-on rework that even Shadow Priest got in BFA, in Shadowlands a bit, and even more in Dragonflight. So I think, as a whole, Arms Warrior, they are in a great spot. They have a lot of comps, and that's why they are actually top 3 played in threes. And in general, you have some good matchups, but also some bad matchups as well. And then Havoc Demon Hunter still very popular since the beginning of the season. They do get a lot less participation because they got nerfed multiple times, and a lot of Havoc Demon Hunters actually went on to play Arms Warriors, even a bit of Feral Druids, Windwalkers, and then also Assassination Rogues. There's also a lot of Havoc Demon Hunters that are going to spill over to the caster meta, but again, I'm going to talk about it once we are at the casters. And you still have clear weaknesses here and there. And Hasman Shaman being played mostly turbo with a arms warrior. Survival hunter mostly in tuck cleave. It's not super effective, but it can work. Again, you're very squishy. You can really carry games, but you have to be very strong to be able to perform. So that's also a possibility. We have Frost DKs being the obvious, not so great DK spec, and Holy DK is still very strong, and still, I think, like I said, the participation got lower because the nerfs really hit Unholy DK. And I also said that it is abnormal to see a DK spec being top 2 into the most played specs, because it is not a very popular class in general. And whenever you see them pop at top 2, it just means that it is very busted. Well, for example, Arms Warrior, even though it's not busted, you might see them in the top 3 because it is a fan favorite spec. Or even just the class, like whenever Fury Warrior was a thing, it's also a top 3 spec played whenever it is actually played by the most like of the cast of the people that are playing World of Warcraft right now. We have Windwalker being still a special spec. Really, the participation didn't really drop too much. They got a lot of nerfs, so the people that were playing Flavor of the Month one-shots Windwalker, they are gone. Although I think Windwalker is still very strong. Doing a Rising Sun kick of 150k is lethal, and that happens much more often than a Mortal Strike being a 150k. So I think Windwalkers are very fine right now. But the clear outliers are Outlaw Rogue and Fury Warriors. There are no real reasons to go for Outlaw Rogue or a Fury spec, except if you really love to play that. I think Assassination Rogue is just that much stronger, and people that are like fan favorite of Outlaw, like for example Naj, they are going to still play Outlaw Rogue. I think people are hopping spec to spec just to see the power level of those specs. I think those are not going to stick at Outlaw, for example. So this is pretty much the melee meta in EU. In ranged meta, you have clearly Beastmaster. Again, I think that's a very EU thing. We have a lot of hunters and a lot of Beastmastery hunters, and we are not shy to play very strong specs, although maybe some people might not like Beastmastery. It is a very, very strong spec. It is very naughty whenever they can get a trap, a stun, a camera shot, anything to actually stop people, camera sing, excuse me, so they silence PvP talent from them. They have a lot of tools to make it work, and they are especially super strong versus melees that are mostly organized. If you are yourself organized in a feral, like a jungle cleave, or let's say a thug cleave, or even KFC. I think KFC is also a fantastic comp, which is with an arms warrior. And just in general, I think the pairing of those two are very, very chill and very awesome to play. And then you have like Destruction Warlock being, like I said, a S tier spec. And nobody was believing me that whenever I said like Destruction Warlock was hidden OP. Because right now, I think people do realize that the Destruction Warlock is very strong. I don't know if it's really wanting a nerf, because it's is counterable. A lot of things are actually counterable from Destruction Warlock. I think they might maybe just remove Bane of Havoc, and then that would like put him in line into B tier or A tier. But personally, I would not like to hit that, because Mayhem is useless without Bane of Havoc. And Bane of Havoc is a PvP talent that would not be used if Mayhem was not a thing. So I don't know if it's going to stay like this forever, but right now Destruction Warlock is very, very strong, and it is also very played right now. And Demonology has too many bugs on their Tyrant, on their Pit Lord, on their like summons, that it doesn't really make sense if you want to push rating to rely on those AIs that are not going to work whenever you do need. And especially since people know how to stop a Demonology Warlock, it's also very difficult to actually play one and perform. Affliction Warlock is just the worst cast spec right now. I would even say that Fire Mage is that much stronger compared to Affliction Warlock. I think the meta is just not suiting for Affliction Warlock. In any Affliction Warlock comp that you could play, like Shadowplay or Ele Shaman, Lock, or even, I don't know, man, Affliction Havoc, or Affliction whatever Warrior, for example, Affliction with a Rogue, any combination that you can make for Destruction is just that much better compared to an Affliction Warlock. Playing Affliction Warlock is basically trying to get carried, because that's how you kill people. You try to be tanky, you try to be just on the back foot, try to put some dots that are difficult to dispel, but sometimes it is not even difficult to dispel. And I think the one matchup where you could do good is versus a Discipline Priest, but even then a Discipline Priest can just pump even harder than you, and at that point it is just like a question of time. Are you going to kill the Discipline Priest, or the team from the Discipline Priest, or is the Discipline Priest with the 2 meaties or 2 range or whatever going to kill you or your allies within that time frame? So for me, Affliction Warlock is definitely the worst caster spec right now. People can say stop the cap, and you can say that to me, but I think mostly people are frustrating to play versus Affliction Warlocks. They just don't know how to play against one, and I would strongly advise to play one and to test one in solo shuffle, but also in threes. I think in solo shuffle it's even worse than in threes, because you cannot even choose your allies. But in threes, it's pretty much a dampening game, which is not a dampening game anymore. It's pretty much you're trying to get a 4 minute, 5 minute mark threes game, which often not doesn't even result in a win for you. It can result in a win, but it doesn't really necessarily give that. So that's why it's like bottom of the most played classes. Also, Affliction is a fan favorite spec, so it's even more surprising to see it at the bottom of the most played specs, because people would rather play Affliction instead of Destruction or Demonology Warlock. But right now there is no point or no reason to play it, unfortunately. Devastation Evoker, they have just a handful comps, and it is easily killed. I think in Soul Shuffle, with all the mayhem, you can score kills and one-shots, but in threes, the thing is, a lot of things are pretty obvious. Whenever you see an Eternity Surge, or whatever, scattering like a Shattering Star, or so, like something like that, you know that the burst is coming, just use your CDs, and then it's over. Then it's pretty much going to try to survive until your next Dragon Rage, and you can still kill people with Leaving Flames and such with procs from your 4-set, but it's not reliable. Any other specs other on this tier list, on the meta specialization representation, is just more reliable, and it is just the case right now. I want to talk about the mage specs. They are not very much represented, but they are more and more though, because people do realize that Frost Mage don't really need too much CC to make it work. You can play a Kamikaze build, which is basically trying to go melee, like stun everyone and push Ice Lance with a Frozen Orb, and pretty much like one-shot someone, or make them trinket, and then it's an easy polymorph afterwards towards the healer. So there is always possibilities. You can also play Glacial Spikes, and you have to play with Destruction Warlock to make it work, for example. But you have many comps that you can actually make work Frost Mage without playing Glacial Spike, right? Marksmanship Hunter got like more played right now because it got changed, and because it does feel better like how they do damage. It's the buffs made that a aim shot is pretty much just a bit worse than a aim shot with double tap, just a bit. So it means that every time you're going to do an aim shot, it is the equivalent to a bit less of a double tap. So it's a huge win whenever you can do an aim shot. And rapid fire, it got nerfed because double tap is obviously making rapid fires that much stronger. But the combination of all those buffs and just the feeling of the class, I think in general, I think Marksmanship Hunter has a place in the meta. Also, they are very good versus casters, so it makes them actually very desirable to play. I think the best comes for them. IMO is playing with Tug, but I can't wait for 10.0.7 where you can play Marksmanship Hunter with a Retribution Paladin and probably wreak havoc in that bracket, right? Balance Druid has a bit of a resurgence, but again, it's a very specialized spec. Not everyone plays Balance Druid, and it is not going to be as popular. And once you see Balance Druid like on the top of the list, it just means that it is busted. It's the same as like an Unholy Decay or Frost Decay. Whenever it's on top of the list, it just means that it is broken. While, for example, BM Hunter, not Destruction, but like just Warlock in general, Shadow Priest, Elemental Shamans, they are often in top 4 played classes or specs, because those are fan favorite specs for multiple people. So that's more or less my explanation behind it. Like, for example, Assassination Rogue being top of the list is a nuisance, because it should not happen. Normally rogues are very specialized. Not everyone is going to play a rogue, but right now everyone and their mother are playing rogues, so there is maybe a reason for that. Now let's talk about healers really quickly. obviously Disc Priest is just very strong, but also just in general, it is a fun spec to play. You can do damage, you can have, I would say, pressure outside of the CDs of your like your partners. You can basically burst with your partners. You can also just play a bit of a laid back spec, but even then you should not do that. I think doing more offense is a sort of a defensive for you, because people are going to play more on the back foot, which means less damage to heal from your allies. It is a very good spec right now. It's also Purge City, so whenever you're playing with an Elemental Shaman, Disc Priest, you know they're going to purge all your hosts, and if you're a Resto Druid or a Preservation Evoker, you can already write RIP, it's over. If they are good. Of course, if the Disc Priest sucks, you can really win a lot of games, but I can count all, like, I can see a lot of posts from Resto Druids actually complaining from Purge. I think Purge costing nearly no mana compared to a hot is a problem. I think they should maybe get a nerf on Purge on any class and any spec. I think it's way too strong in this current meta, and something has to change for that. Resto Druid, very passive healer. It can make it work with like double melees, for example. I would not really play it with casters, but you can make it work with casters. It makes you very hard to actually kick whenever you're playing with casters, because Cyclone, if you kick that, you will eat a Chaos Bot if you're playing with a lock, for example. I think LSD, for example, is one of the best comps for Restoration Druid. So LSD is Lock Shaman Druid, often than not is Resto Druid, Elemental Shaman, and a Destruction Warlock or Demolition Warlock or Affliction Warlock. You can also play LSD2, which is basically Balanced Druid and having a Resto Shaman, but that's like a less popular spec. Comp to play in. Preservation Evoker still very popular. It's good, but people do realize now how to counter a Preservation Evoker. It's a lot easier to kill, although their output is still very good. And I think for now, Preservation Evoker is probably the best healer in RBGs. You generally want 2, for example. But in threes, it's popular, but mainly because of the beginning of the season. I think the more the season goes and the more nerfs that Preservation Evokers gets, I think it will just go even lower than Restoration Shaman, which just needs a buff to get like more people to play in. I think it's also a very popular spec. In general, you do see it in top 3 healers whenever it's good. Holy Paladin got a nerf, but people now adapt as a Holy Paladin with their Avenging Crusader. Now, I don't know if you can actually play like a casting Holy Paladin, like the normal wings. I think it's a bit risky. If you're playing with melees, you get kicked pretty easily. And Mistweavers in trees are a lot easier to stop than in Soul Shuffle, because you can actually communicate. You can say, look, that's a Fistweaver. You just need to stun it and just like burst him down and he will die. Or if he's like a casting Mistweaver, you pretty much kick him once and it is over. Especially versus casters. Like, casters are going to eat Mistweavers alive, because their interrupt is like 6 seconds and you cannot do anything versus that except like baiting. But even whenever you bait, you don't have heals. Your healing is very subpar. So whenever you try to fake cast, you do lose a lot of time. And some people just are not going to kick you if you're fake casting, except whenever you do need to heal. At that point, they're going to interrupt you. It's pretty much GG's for you. And Holy Priest is the obvious like bad healer of this season. I hope they do get changed. I think in general, I will make a guide, or not a guide, but I want to make a discussion video on how to improve like the healer representation, because clearly right now in Solo Shuffle, Disc Priest and Fist Weaving is super popular. The reason is they do damage, so it's fun for DPSs to play those classes and those specs. And I think in general you want healers to do more damage, but the problem is whenever healers do more damage, DPSs do need to self-heal more. And with self-healing being nerfed, the ones that are actually having more defensive, like for example, Assassination Rogues, Feral Druids, like Havoc Demon Hunters, you have a lot of classes like, let's say, Destruction Warlock, Shadow Priest. People that have defensives are going to thrive in that meta, because again, if you have defensives and like the healer is DPSing, they are not healing, so it means that they are going to get got. So I think they should change a few things here and there. They should really buff the damage from Resto Druid, from Preservation Evoker. I would not really buff it. I think it's just a change in maybe a build variation where you can play a bit more aggressive. Restoration Shaman has a damage, but the problem is it should be like Disc Priest a bit and Fist Weaving, where whenever you're doing damage, and you should have it on low CD, that it is also going to heal your allies. Like Ancestral Guidance exists, but it is a CD based spell, so it means you cannot do Ancestral Guidance every time you're going to do damage, and that's unfortunate. Holy Paladin have damage, but only whenever they are doing wings, and it is stoppable, and it is very, very greedy as well. And Holy Priest just had no damage compared to Disc Priest, so I think if they actually reversed a lot of things from Shadowlands and just maybe add the Kyrian Covenant ability from Shadowlands into the Holy Priest tree, it might make them more played, but right now it just is not the case. And that's mostly the problem. Now let's talk really quickly about NA, because it is pretty much the same, but I'm going to talk about the outliers. You have more Unholy DKs, because you have a lot of Unholy DKs mains, so Pet Kick, you have you have a lot of other DK content creators that are playing just more Unholy DKs, and people do play more Unholy DK in NA, but in EU DKs are not really popular at all. You do see them sometimes, but it is not as popular. Which is surprising is you have a lot less rogues in NA. You have more warriors, so that's actually very impressive to see, but it doesn't really indicate why it is that strong. I think assassination is still much more stronger than arms, but if assassination gets a nerf, I think you will see a lot of arms warriors playing in NA and in EU. So I think you will see a lot more of them once they get a nerf. I think they will get nerfed, but we never know. And that's pretty much the outlier from the melees. From the ranged ones, you see that there is a lot less BM hunters, but more MM hunters. But again, that's pretty much the content creators. You have a lot more MM content creators and a lot less BM content creators. Again, I am a BM hunter player. I make BM hunters videos, and I just feel that there is just not a lot of videos or content around BM hunters. Well, for example, MM, you have a lot more competition, right? So it just feels like that. You have a bit more affliction warlocks for some reason, but pretty much there is actually no reason. They should not really play affliction warlock. The many affliction warlocks that are playing right now are pretty much hardcore affliction warlock mains that they don't really care about the meta. But you do see that destruction warlock is just overtaking everything, because it is a class that has potential to kill and have potential to carry games. So that's pretty much the outlier there. And fire mage being not that much played, it is actually just you have a lot less mages in NA than in EU. That is just a fact. In EU you have RMP lords, and in NA you have pretty much melee cleaves. And I think you guys from NA, you can tell me in the comments section below if I actually am correct with that. But I think I am very correct with my statement. And you see also, you see a lot of Discipline Priest again in NA, a lot of Resto Druid, a lot of Preservation Evoker, but also a lot of Holy Paladins. But that is also a lot of content creators that are actually playing Holy Paladin. You have a lot of players that are actually following content creators, and that's not a problem because it just works like that. But you see also that the popularity has to do with the amount of content creators playing on a region. And for example, in AU you don't have a lot of Holy Paladins, and in NA you have a lot of streamers and YouTubers that are actually covering Holy Paladin, which is not a problem, but that is also an indication on the popularity of the spec in certain regions. Now I want to talk really quickly about twos. In twos, there is not much to talk, right? I'm going to go for EU real quickly, and there is two outliers, even more than in threes, and it is pretty much Assassination Rogues being overly played in EU, and then you have Arms Warrior, which is working with a Resto Shaman, with a Mistweaver Monk, which is often a Fistweave, or even a Resto Druid. And while all the Assassination Rogues and BM Hunters are actually playing with Discipline Priest and Resto Druids. So that is pretty much the meta. You have BM Hunters, Assassination Rogues, Arms Warriors, and then the outliers, which are the classes, which is Demonology Warlock. You have Marksmanship Hunter, because it is a spec that is a fan favorite spec for twos, although it's not very, very strong. You have Pearl Druid, Discipline Priest, which is one of the best comps. Survival Hunters, Discipline Priest with Resto Druid, one of the best comps, although without Craven Stratagem, it is a lot easier to kill Survival Hunters. And then you have obviously the worst specs in the game for twos, and it is an indication because Again, I think if a spec is not as good in twos but a bit better in threes, it just means that how dependable it is. Like a retribution paladin in twos has to play double DPS pretty much, or go for the healer every time. But you cannot go for healer every time. Try to go for a resto druid. The resto druid will just outrun you most of the time. Or frost decay, it is just not as reliable. But people play unholy decay most of the time. Enhancement shaman, it is not strong. They don't have a MS effect. All those classes don't have MS effect except fury and outlaw to a certain extent, but they have better specs like arms and assassination rogue. And then you have like the better ones which have an MS effect or kill pressure or a good twos comp, like for example subtlety rogue with a frost mage or a fire mage or a arcane mage. That's actually a very good comp. And then obviously you have the outliers here and there. In ranged ones, again, the ranged ones are not going to be very good in twos. You may think Affliction Warlock is good in twos, but it is not. Destruction Warlock is also not very good in twos because pillars are not our friends. People are going to run to the pillars every time they don't have a go, and then they go back to you whenever they have a go. So that's the problem. Shadow Priest, it can work in double DPS, but often not you don't want to play with just a healer, so that's why it's not as popular. And obviously you have the hunter specs being on top because they have CC, and pretty much twos is a CC land bracket. If you have CC or you have damage, you're going to be good. If you have none of those, or you have no MS effects, or you cannot stick damage to the wall without being healed, then you will end up with a lot less representation. And healers wise, it is Discipline Priest, Resto Druid show with the occasional Fist Weavers. And sometimes a Holy Priest because it can work with Chastise, being again a CC option. And then you have Resto Shaman being there to do damage and be cheesy with your Arms Warrior, for example. And then you have the like Holy Paladin getting wrecked because you cannot do too much. They are going for you, and once you have bubbled, it is over. Especially since you have to play versus a lot of Disc Priest, fast MD is a thing, so you're going to bubble for nothing, get dispelled, and then die afterwards. And Preservation Evoker in twos are very easy to kill. Because you have a target less, it is also a lot easier to kill, and your AoE healing is not as impressive in twos than in threes or in RBGs, so that's why it is less represented. Now let's talk really quickly about NA. Still, the two most played specs are Assassination and Arms, and then you have like Havoc and Unholy Decay being the top 4. Unholy Decay again in the top 10 of the Unholy Decays. You have like a Unholy Decay that is maining 5, and all those 5s are actually in the top 10. I think he even has more. I didn't check since then, but obviously the least played specs are still the same: Frost Decay, Retribution, Paladin, Enhancement Shaman, and then you have the occasional Fury Warrior. Although there's no really reasons to play Fury right now. And ranged wise, still Double Hunter, pretty much very strong because they have Trap, they have Intimidation, Stun, they have Scatter Shot to basically stop goes. Very strong. Shadow Priest still very popular in NA, and then you have like those casters which can work, but there is a reason why it's not working. If you're playing versus Assassination Rogue, you are at their mercy. They can also just escape, peel or hump until they have a go, and you're pretty much dead afterwards. You see a lot of mages in twos as well with Arcane Mage, but you have all those Meech Jones pretty much going for one shots, and that works in twos and in NA pretty much. And healer wise, again, Disc Priest show into Resto Druid, into Mistweaver, which is often a Fist Weaver, and then you have Restoration Shaman and Holy Priest being in the top 5, like in NA, and then Preservation Evoker, Holy Paladin being the least played specs in twos. Now I want to talk really quickly about RBGs, and I'm going to give you my sentiment in Soul Shuffle. So in RBGs, again, the Rogue specs plus Havoc are king of melees, and then you have Feral Druid being also a very good spec to actually AoE. And then you have like the occasional Arms Warrior, Retribution, Paladin, Unholy Decay. Although there is actually no reason to play Unholy Decay in RBGs, you should actually play Frost. But I don't know why it is like this, but there is actually no reason. You can just like AoE stun with Frost Decay. But I guess the disease damage and such can be interesting as an Unholy Decay. As a ranged meta, you have Destruction Warlock, Balance Druid, Elemental Shaman being top. And then you have the occasional Affliction Warlock to actually give some dispel protection, although it is actually not needed anymore because you have elemental shaman. But people don't really dispel in RBGs because they are afraid of getting a big dispel protection on their face, like for example elemental shaman. And if you're clumped up and you dispel elemental shaman, you're going to knock everyone up, so that's not something you want to do. You see a lot less beast mastery. Again, pet classes are quite bad in RPGs, and also just like mages are not very good. Like arcane and fire, they are like CD based, and often not in RPGs you need to have consistent damage. So that's why frost mages are a bit better, but it's not that much better. And in preservation are the meta healers. So often you're trying to get 2 preservation evokers if you want to do a meta comp, 2 preservation evoker into a disc priest, or 2 preservation evoker into a mistweaver. And you have the occasional resto druid or holy paladin for a few maps, but this is pretty much the meta, and nothing is actually different with like NA. You still have the top 3, which is havoc, subtlety rogue, and assassination rogue. And in ranged wise, you still have destruction, balance, and elemental shaman being top 3, and marksmanship hunter being very strong in RPGs. Finally, some people do realize it, because you can play sniper shot and make it hell for a lot of people, are actually in the top 4, which is something I like to see. And healer wise, again, preservation, mistweaver, and disc priest being the top 3, with the other healers being like very much behind. That those are the healers that want to grind conquest or honor, but they are not really grinding like CR. So this is pretty much my take for RPGs. I want to talk briefly about soul shuffle. I'm not going to show you anything because we don't really have a lot of statistics, because it's very hard. People can go 3k and then not play anymore. But I think the meta hasn't really changed. I think there is no real nerfs coming into the way for assassination rogues. Nothing happens for casters like destruction warlock, BM hunters. I would say elemental shamans still very strong because they didn't really get touched. You have a few specs here and there that are very much performing. Like let's say, if I'm going for just the general top 10 in EU, if I can. Let's try to do this. So the top 10 in EU, you have pretty much a lot of rogues. So rogues are very strong. You're going to tell me, look, rogues they're like very much inting my games, but clearly rogues are doing very fantastic in soul shuffle. You have the occasional mages. Again, mages are very strong. You have a lot of agency, you have CC, and you have the damage to actually provide like yourself the wins. And then you have the best disc priest healer pretty much for EU, which is JT. And then you have Brucein, which is the brewmaster tank spec for monk. And then you have the occasional demon hunters and windwalkers here and there. So this is pretty much the meta. You have a lot of rogues, and then the occasional casters here and there. You have feral druids, you have BM hunters, but you don't see a lot of arms warrior. You do see arms warriors, but they are not as good. And even like win rate wise, you do see that arms warrior just lack the win rates to actually be even higher. Like here, 55% win rate, while other people are sitting at 72, 64, 62%. So it's not really as reliable to climb as a warrior, because you get like bad matchups if you're playing versus a all caster cleave like comp or soul shuffle, where they have a lot of CC. You as a warrior, you are in a disadvantage, because you have to be like carried by other people, and sometimes you get the odd win, like the odd 3 wins, 4 wins, or 5 wins, but it's very hard to actually be reliable on those matchups. I think as a whole, the best healers right now is probably Disc Priest, and very close by Fist Weaving and Mist Weaving in general, because they have like 2 builds that can be switched match dependent. So if you're Fist Weaving one round and then you go for Mist Weaving, people are not going to understand it. They don't know how to deal with it, and you can really win games because of that. So I think in general, it's interesting how it works, and it's very interesting how they are actually trying to push Soul Shuffle. I think Soul Shuffle is very great. I think the problem is it's too easy to queue and go AFK. I think too many people are actually queuing for Soul Shuffle, which is a good thing. It means that it is successful, but there is not a lot of healers. But in a future video, I want to talk about how to improve the healer queues, or at least the healers to actually come into Soul Shuffle. So this is pretty much my meta-analysis video. It's a long video, but I wanted to talk about about every single bracket, about every single region. Pretty much NA is pretty much the same. Like you see a lot of Windwalkers pretty much in NA, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll go on US. You see a lot of Demon Hunters, a lot of Windwalkers, a bit of mages here and there. You see a bit more arms though, and that's an indication because there is just a lot less casters in Soul Shuffle for them for some reason. You see a lot of Havocs, you see a lot of Assassination Rogues, and all those specs are actually okay if you're playing as an Arms Warrior. But like those Destruction Warlock, Demonology Warlocks and such, they're very much a nightmare for warriors if they have like the right comps and the right enemies to face. So that's pretty much my video. Again, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. I have a second channel where we are talking about classic content, classic everything. So be sure to subscribe to that as well. I have that in my description below and probably somewhere in the comments. Again, thank you for the unending support. Thank you for the subscribers. Thank you for the viewers. And thank you for all the donators and members that just joined in on the channel. I can't thank you guys enough. And we will catch each other very soon in the next video. Have a good day. Bye.